Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Okay, we're back in the studio with Jeff Roberts, an injury attorney down in Calloway County. Jeff, good morning, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Jim?
Buddy, I'm doing great. I love coming down here and chatting with you. So let's talk about this today. Our topic is cumulative trauma injuries, and these are also called repetitive injuries, right? Repetitive trauma, repetitive use, a lot of different terms for it.
Yes, cumulative trauma, repetitive use injuries, or wear and tear injuries all kind of refer to the same thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And really, this is a workers' comp issue. I mean, because a lot of times when you're using the same motion or you're using the same range of motions altogether, you tend to wear down. And these obviously have medical issues.
They do, and that's kind of why it's called. Some people refer to them as wear and tear injuries or cumulative trauma, because there's not one specific incident that caused the problems. It's doing the activity over a long period of time can cause problems to develop, and it's can be. If you're doing a job where you're lifting overhead, wearing the shoulders down over a period of time. If you're doing a lot of typing, carpal tunnel can develop, or other nerve impingements in the forearm area can develop from that. Or if you're doing a job where you're having to repetitively lift, that can cause a wear and tear injury in the spine. So there's a variety of different jobs out there that can create these wear and tear type of injuries, and you tend to see these, not exclusively, but you tend to see these in people who've had a job for several years. They can come on much quicker than that in certain situations, but most of the time when I'm talking to a client who's had a cumulative trauma injury, that they've been with the employer 5 years, 10 years, or something of that nature.
In the same or a similar role or function. But again, you just kind of wear down. And I think a lot of times, if you're a carpenter and you're using hand tools, obviously that same twisting motion if you're working with a screwdriver or ratchets and things like that. But if you're on a line somewhere and you've got a power tool or an air tool, some type of hand tool, again, it's the same type of motion over and over and over, shift after shift after shift. And I'm sorry, even a washer and dryer breaks down at home because you use it so much. If you're using the same motion, those muscles, those nerves, those joints, eventually they just kind of wear down.
Exactly, that is what will take place. And then you see it in the trades, certainly, where they're doing, I've represented iron workers who've had wear and tear injuries, carpenters, bridge builders, things of that nature. And a lot of times they're, because of the nature of what they're doing.
It's a hard job.
Yeah, it's a hard job. And, if they lift something really heavy and they have a sudden onset of pain, that's probably going to be a specific trauma as opposed to a cumulative trauma. But frankly, the cumulative trauma before that could play a big part of that, I should say. But then you do see it in assembly line jobs from that perspective. And one of the things that, a lot of assembly lines several years ago started rotating, doing job rotation. And part of the reason for the job rotation was to try to reduce the number of cumulative trauma injuries so that they would rotate. If you're doing a job that is a lot of hand movement, hand issues on one station, then they move to another station where you're not doing that as often, to give people breaks so they don't have the cumulative trauma injuries as frequently.
Well, I would think if I were down here, such as in Murray, where you've got a Pella window, you've probably got a very similar movement for your job responsibility. Maybe you've got to plug this in, or you've got to connect these two pieces, or you've got to shift that piece. You got to pick it up and move it over here. You may have a twisting motion or something like that. I would think you would see a lot of those.
Yes, in that type of a factory, you do see a lot of those. There's a lot of jobs there where you're having to use force as you're using your arms doing the different tasks, and that can cause repetitive injuries or problems with the shoulder of some individuals. It can cause wrist problems for people, even elbow problems at times from that standpoint. So you can see in those type of jobs, the repetitive stress can come into play there and cause upper extremity problems, or depending on where you're at, you may be lifting the product, lifting the windows and moving, or insulated glass or whatever on a repetitive basis, as you're talking about, where you're taking it here and twisting and putting it on another line or another station, and that cause a person to have some spinal issues in their low back that develops because of that twisting all the time.
That makes sense. I talk to my nephew all the time, who's on the assembly line up at Ford. But your practice is definitely regional. I mean, you reach out well beyond Calloway County. Bowling Green's got the assembly plant up there as well.
Yeah, General Motors.
Yeah, General Motors up there, and I would think a lot of that, depending on where you are in the line, you might have some overhead. And so you're going to have some shoulder injuries and back and neck strains and things like that, I would think.
That, and you see, at least clients, I've represented several people who are injured at General Motors there, and I do have a regional practice. I handle cases in far western Kentucky, and I've handled cases in Cincinnati, Kentucky, or not Cincinnati, in Covington, Kentucky,
Yep.
just this side of Cincinnati, and as far east as Whitesburg. So I've handled cases all over Kentucky. Now I'm a little more selective in cases a long way away from me. And now with the video conference Zoom, I'm actually not being as selective just because of the ease with which I can interact with the judges and my client over the video conference technology. But General Motors, I've seen a lot of injuries there. Actually, I've seen a lot of hand and upper extremity injuries from doing the repetitive activities, using air guns and things of that nature to assemble the Corvettes that they assemble up there. And it's just when you're on a task, doing it day in, day out, 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, depending on what your employer's schedule is, doing that same task, it wears the body down. You can develop. And some people don't realize that it's a wear and tear injury or cumulative trauma injury because they go to the doctor and the doctor looks at it and says, they may say, if it's somebody who does repetitive lifting, your low back is the low back of an 80-year-old, and you're talking about a 45-year-old individual, and think it's just arthritis, and they don't make the connection that my work activities are why my spine is in the shape that it's in, or why my shoulder is in the shape that it's in.
Well, and that brings up 2 points, and I want to deviate a little bit from the cumulative trauma, but let's talk specifically to somebody who's been injured. Sometimes the company is going to say, okay, you need to go, see the on-site medical facility, and we'll get you fixed up. But sometimes we call that the company doctor, and there's an issue there sometimes. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, but also the fact that, it's important if you do seek outside medical assistance, you go to your primary care, or you go to a specialist that they may refer you to let them know this was a work-related injury. They need to kind of document that, right?
Yes, if it's a specific trauma, absolutely 100%. You need to document that. If it's a cumulative trauma and you suspect that it's your work activities, you need to tell the doctor that immediately as well. A lot of times you don't realize until, frequently it's the doctor that tells the injured worker. They find out they worked at General Motors and they say, well, this problem is probably related to what you do at work. Or, somebody that works at Saputo doing where they're lifting product up over their head, over their shoulders a lot, and says, your shoulder injury is because of, this is a degenerative tear of the rotator cuff, and it's from repetitive shoulder going overhead like that from your work at Saputo. And so a lot of times it's the doctors who let them know that that's what where the problem developed. And sometimes just in the standpoint of saying, look, you need to maybe get into a different job so you don't do any further damage. But then when you find that out, the injured worker needs to tell the employer this is a work-related injury. If it's
Right.
specific trauma, you tell them you need to tell them as well. But when you find out from the doctor this is work-related, you tell the employer that it is work-related from that perspective.
And it's important that the doctor actually kind of get that into the medical record, into the notes, because a lot of what you do when you're handling a workers' compensation claim here in Kentucky is based on the medical record. I mean, the judge really wants to see what the doctors and the specialists have to say about it, because it's a qualified opinion, right?
Correct. Exactly. And if it's not in there, it makes my job much more difficult. And in fact, I have turned down cases or told individuals that unfortunately I didn't think I could be successful in their case because the doctor's notes never documented that they told them about the work injury, whether it's cumulative trauma or a specific work injury. And if you've gone along for getting treatment for a period of time, a year and a half, and you've never documented that, it's going to be hard to convince a judge that this is related to a work accident that you've never told anybody about the work accident. Right. And so it can make or break the case.
And that's an important issue because, again, what that doctor says and what they document is such a valuable piece of medical evidence. But let me come back to the issue of why in Kentucky you do have a right to pick your own doctor. And sometimes that, call it in-house doctor or the medical team there on site, may have a different set of priorities, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's true. Some employers have a plant nurse that's on staff. That's where you're supposed to go report the injury to and maybe seek the initial treatment. And there's nothing wrong with doing that from that perspective. But if you seek medical treatment, you are actually entitled under Kentucky law to choose what doctor you treat with. And normally that is completely unfettered. You can go to any doctor you want to for treatment as long as that doctor will take you on as a patient. Some doctors won't treat workers' comp claims. If the employer has a managed care plan, then you may have to stay within the providers within that managed care plan. You would have to stay within the providers of that managed care plan except for emergency treatment. But the employer is required to tell you they have a managed care plan and provide you the names of the providers within that plan. So if you're looking for a family, a primary care doctor, they've got to let you know all the primary care doctors within that plan, at least in your general area. If you're in Murray,
you still get to choose.
You choose from those doctors within that plan. From that standpoint, so you get to pick. They can't say we want you to go to
Dr. Smith.
Dr. Smith for this treatment. There was, several years when I first started practicing, Mayfield had the General Tire plant there that had been there for several years. It's gone out now, but they would tell every injured worker, you've got to go see Dr. Fields for a work-related injury. Law, that was never the law. They couldn't tell somebody you had to go see Dr. Fields for to treat for the work-related injury, but they told everyone that, and I had a ton of, I had clients when I first talked to them, and I said, you don't have to see Dr. Fields. You can go to whoever you want to.
And real simply, why would a company do that? Why would they want you to go see a specific doctor?
A couple of reasons I think there are for that. One is it's a doctor that will relay information back to them. Because technically a doctor is not supposed to give them any information about the patient's treatment unless they've got a signed medical authorization. But if you, and I'm not saying Dr. Fields violated that, but I think there are some doctors who have. In fact, I know there are some doctors who've relayed information back to the employer. In fact, I had one where the doctor had given my client an off work slip at the appointment, and then 3 hours later talked to the employer and said, yeah, he can come back to work light duty. The only problem is nobody told my client, so they were expecting my client to come back to work. My client didn't know he was supposed to come back to work. Luckily, we were able to they tried to terminate him. We were able to get that straightened out for the client in that setting. But that's one of the reasons is that they have that. Another is I think they think they have more control over the doctor, and I've seen some of these quote unquote plant doctors that have released clients to go back to work in situations that I never thought they would be released. And if they had gone to somebody besides the plant doctor, probably would not have been released to go back to work from that standpoint. And I think part of that comes into play with the plant doctor does those things because that's a good source of business.
All those referrals from the company to his office.
They get the
or her
referrals
office.
they get the referrals from the company, from there, and so they've got it's a good source of business coming in for that doctor in that setting, in which they get paid for. So I think it's if you have a repeat customer, you try to keep that repeat customer happy, and I think that's what comes into play there, and a financial incentive to some extent for both in that setting.
Right, and not that every doctor does that. Obviously, a lot of doctors are just fantastic people, and they do the best they can for the patient sitting in front of them. But at the same time, it does happen. The point of this is you don't have to go where the company says. You can go choose your own doctor, and especially when you're dealing with cumulative trauma, these repetitive injuries, that's important because you're probably going to have not only some physical therapy that may come in, you may have some light duty or change of stations somehow. But you also may have, again, possibly a surgery that is a result of this activity. Carpal tunnel surgery. We've all heard of that before. We have that incision in the wrist, and they go in there. Jeff, go ahead.
And that comes back to one of the other reasons why they want to send you to the company doctor is, at least in my experience over 29 years, is the company doctor, especially on a cumulative trauma claim. The company doctor is much less likely to say the work activities are what caused this problem, and than an outside a doctor you pick yourself
Right.
Would say in that regard. And if they've got the company doctor, the initial doctor who's saying this isn't work related, then that creates problems down the road in a couple of respects, not the least of which is then workers' comp is not going to pay for any of the medical treatment until you have a judge that tells them they got to pay for that medical treatment.
Right. And sometimes that's just an unnecessary battle. It happened at work. It was work-related. It was on the job. It should be covered. But again, it's a question of how much money does the company want to give up and how much money does the insurance carrier want to spend in terms of helping that employee get back on the job and get healthy.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, sometimes it becomes a difficult process. That's why you stand in the gap and you're able to represent those clients so they're going effectively, is because you understand how the games get played sometimes.
Yes, that's true. After doing this as many years as I have, there's very few new tricks that they throw at me.
Well, Jeff, let me ask you this. A lot of times, when I think of cumulative trauma, I'm not talking about just the twisting of the torque motion that somebody does just performing the task, but sometimes I'm using an impact tool or a power tool or something like that. Does that make it worse? Does that accelerate that breakdown over time? Do you know? I know you're not a doctor, but you've done a lot of these cases.
At least what doctors have told me, yes. A tool that has a lot of vibration to it can cause, it can cause the wear and tear injuries to break down, the arthritis to develop much quicker, or tearing of the tendons and things of that nature over, the wear on that causes them to degenerate. So, those type of tools can be problematic over the long term use from that standpoint. And it's the type that when you do it, you don't really feel the pain doing it. And you do it day in, day out. And when, it may get to the point that when you get off work, you're having pain, and you just think, okay, it's just, I've strained the muscle, nothing major, no big deal. Yeah. And then it just keeps getting worse and worse over time. And that's frankly, that's a very typical thing that I hear from clients when I'm talking to them is, I've done this job for a long time. It never bothered me, and then one day, at the end of the work shift, I was achy when I hadn't been before in my shoulders, in my wrists, whatever, and then it just kept getting progressively worse over that period. So.
No, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you this. Coming back to the injured worker, if I'm filing a claim and I've given notice to my employer, my supervisor, somebody kind of above me in the pecking order, if you will, and then maybe I get in touch with you and I've got medical treatment happening. If it's a single event, maybe I get hit by something at work versus a cumulative trauma related injury. Is there a difference in the value of that case? It doesn't really matter, does it? It comes down to the severity of the injury. Right?
It comes down to the severity of the injury. There's a variety of factors that come into play on the value of a workers' compensation claim. Temporary total disability benefits, which are what you receive when you're off work under doctor's orders, is 66 2/3% of your average weekly wage subject to the state cap. It's the same regardless if it's a specific trauma or a cumulative trauma or an occupational disease or hearing loss.
Hearing loss is pretty understandable.
Yeah.
I'm around a lot of loud machinery, and I don't hear as well.
Yeah.
The other occupational disease, that could be from exposure to chemicals and things like that. Is that generally what that is?
Yes, as a general rule. Now, a lot of occupational diseases are exposure to dust, fumes, chemicals.
Okay.
Coal workers will get coal workers pneumoconiosis, commonly referred to as black lung. And at least, we don't have, in Calloway County, we don't have coal mines here, but my understanding is kind of pretty much if you're in the coal mines for a long period of time, you're going to eventually develop. It's just a question of when.
Wow.
I may be wrong in that regard, but that's my understanding of it. But there's other, I've represented people who've had cancer actually because of exposure to heavy metals and things of that nature, or exposure to chemicals where they have some that's had internal organ damage from exposure to chemicals at work. So that's those type of issues come into play from that. Those are called, if it's a disease process, it's an occupational disease claim, and there is a little different. Some procedural things that are different in those cases, but the ultimate benefits are very similar. And pretty much calculated kind of the same way. It's just a question of how you present it in those cases. And it's the same cumulative trauma versus specific trauma. How you calculate permanent disability benefits is still based on the same factors that the attorney has to present to the judge to document those.
Again, it's the severity of the injury. It's not really how you got to that point.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you have a lumbar strain from lifting, a specific trauma, it's going to be worth the value of a lumbar sprain. If the lumbar sprain is from cumulative trauma, results in the same impairment rating, same restrictions, and the same return to work issues, going to be the same value.
Right. And so, again, because your practice is regional, you see a lot of different types of jobs that still have these same types of injuries. So whether that's, again, the GM plant up in Bowling Green, whether that's Pella right here in Calloway County, a lot of these things, if you're standing in one place performing a certain type of job day in, day out, and this can even be a secretary. In reality, carpal tunnel is real. I mean, these are painful situations that prevent you from operating at your best, and it causes you some pain, and it needs to be taken care of. And that's really what workers' compensation is for. It's a work-related issue. And that's really where you come in, is to step in and represent that individual. How do they get in touch with you? How does this begin? What's that process?
The best way to get in touch with me is by phone. To call the office, phone number is 270-753-0053. If you're in Bowling Green and you want to call toll free, the phone number is 1-800-844-5108. That's the best way to get in touch with me. You can also email me. Email address is jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com, and set up an appointment with me. Actually, my website Also, if you happen to be on the website, it's got the do you want to chat function on that, and if you click on that, you're not talking with somebody from my office, but they will get the basic information, and then they will email that to me, or if it's during business hours, they will actually transfer the call transfer you straight to my office if that's what you want to do in by phone. And but otherwise, they will send me an email of the conversation, and we'll reach back out to you during the next business hours. It's a general rule to follow back up on that contact.
Yeah, but if I go out to the website, I'm going to have your phone number right there. And the easiest thing is just pick up the phone.
I agree.
Just pick up the phone, and you guys are really, really responsive, which, I've always enjoyed kind of watching you guys operate. It's really, you're going to get that call back, or that call is going to go through live, if it's normal business hours.
And we do have, I am a busy law office, which I appreciate. I prefer to be busy over being bored, but I have rollover lines. So if we are on the line when you call in, it's going to roll to another line, and it's still going to ring, and somebody in the office is going to answer it. Now, there's a limit to how many rollover lines I got. So if all of them are busy because we're on other calls, then you'll get the voicemail. But as a general rule, you'll get a live person when you call my office.
But yeah, Jeff, I've known you for years. What I like is this office is not a large office. I'm not going to get lost in the weeds here. I mean, you've got a select team here. You guys have been here for many years, and you're gonna be able to get that information. You're gonna know who's talking to you, because you're gonna see those people all the way through the step, all the way through. Okay, let's get you in here. Let's talk about this. Let's get you signed up, and let's go ahead and get in contact and get you the medical treatment you need. The nice thing is you're the attorney that's going to be handling that case. It's not going to be a case manager. It may be one of your paralegals who's involved, but you are overseeing this entire case. And more often than not, they're going to speak directly with you, which is kind of an advantage.
Right. They will speak with me on a very frequent basis. They'll speak with the paralegals on a frequent basis, but they're going to be kept up to date on what's going on. And when they have questions to be answered, I'm going to be the one answering the questions for that. And it's just it's a different philosophy. Some businesses have a philosophy of volume and want to handle a large volume, or it could be selling product and they want to sell a large volume of whatever they're selling. And there's law firms that want to handle a large volume of cases, and I prefer to give much more of a personal approach, and instead of having a large volume, do what I think is a better job on a smaller number of cases than do an adequate job on a large number of cases.
Well, and that comes down to your firm motto, where you talk about small town service.
Exactly. Small town service, big city results. That's what we try to provide for our clients.
That's outstanding. Let's call it a wrap at that statement. I think that's a good way to look at it. Jeff, I appreciate your time. And friends, if you're on the line out there, or maybe you're in one of the trades and you tip and you notice that, wow, these aches and pains are getting more and more prevalent. I'm feeling them worse. I'm not recovering as quickly as I used to. You may have a cumulative trauma situation, and if nothing else, pick up the phone, talk to Jeff and his team, and walk them through kind of what's going on. You may actually have a workers' compensation case. It doesn't have to be one big event where, wow, I fell down and twisted my knee. Maybe it's something else going on. And Jeff has the experience with 29 years of doing this to really be able to help you understand what your options are, understand what the situation is. And it doesn't cost anything to call, which is the nice thing about it. So we want to appreciate the time that you've given us today. And thank you for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more information right here with Jeff Robertson, Calloway County. Thank you very much for listening. And Jeff, thanks for your time.
Thank you, and thank you to the listeners.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.